Fall at Equestria, Clipped Wings, Part 2, Phoenix Rising. And from the ashes the burning wings spread once more. 13 days since he was cut off from the sky. It all started with the waning hours of night turning into a day spent in terror, concluding with a spark of companionship that very evening. 7 days later, the week was rounded out with learning about the wasteland, about each other. Then the darkness came, 3 days of sadness, culminating in a hardened spirit on the morning of the 10th day. It had been 3 days since Falcon Wing left on that drizzy morn under the light grey skies. 3 days since he made his pledge. And in 3 days he found himself towered over by the austere remains of concrete and steel giants. Like the buildings over the cellar, these husks of what used to be homes and workplaces were on the verge of falling in on themselves. It's just that against all odds, they haven't yet. A badly weathered green sign on bent, rusted struts at the edge of the town informed the wingless Pegasus that he was in the town of Hope, the place where his saviors hailed from, the place where the great emotional burdens originated, a place subjected to the very things that made the wasteland the bane of all hope. Falcon Wing glared from behind his hood, the shadow cast on his face making his bright orange eyes stand out. He was beginning to harbor strong dislike for irony while he slunk through the ruined town, staying in the shadows and navigating through tight passages. The atmosphere was comprised mostly of gray, a washed-out palette that only had room for one other color: muddy brown. Most of the walls were in poor condition, chipped, cracked, pockmarked, or blown in completely. Chunks of concrete and rebar lifted the streets. Some streets were blocked off completely by the amount of rubble created by downed buildings. Those streets put that one alleyway in Ponyville to shame. The red colt passed many pre-war posters posted to the walls. Most faded and torn. Some were dishonored in various obscene ways. There was one he kept coming across while sneaking through the ruins of urban Equestria. One he saw from the corner of his eye while he glided. Purely a figure of speech, by the way. Across the concrete and asphalt, with his body held low to the ground. It was the sad yellow mare with pink mane. One poster in particular had dark streaks running down its height, starting at the mare's sorrowful blue eyes. Falcon Wing found that one particularly disturbing, and actually shuddered at the thought that it looked as if she were crying. What really grabbed Falcon Wing's attention, though, was the text associated with the posters. Or, at least, the ones that weren't badly damaged by the elements or defiled. War? Fear? Death? In an ominous bold. Then, under, in an elegant script. We must do better. Falcon Wing chuckled at that for a little bit. Be a better pony, he thought, in his passing of the posters. He wondered what exactly this Ministry of Peace did, aside from keeping peace, or attempting to do so, for all it's worth. He was pulled from his wonder by conversation, one that was heating up, judging by the increasingly loudness of it. One of the parties in the discussion, Falcon Wing cringed. If he heard, then surely others had as well. And in the wasteland, drawing attention to yourself is one of the stupidest things you can do. It is by this rule of hoof he knew immediately what he was going to deal. A raider, possibly with a group of them. Only raiders could be so positively stupid. I said I don't give a fuck! A raider, wearing brown and black barding, barked at another in similar dress. Bits of scrap metal had been twisted into abstract shapes, in forms that incorporated onto their tunics, as if they were meant to be jewelry of a sort. Raider fashion, because sometimes the bones of your victims aren't enough of a statement. The one causing the scene in Post-Apocalyptia was a gray earth pony. The one was yelling at more of a caramel color, but their armor was a dirty brown and thus made up for it. Brown, gray, and black. Colors of hope, Falcon snobbed mentally. Peeking around the corner of the building, his line of sight was disrupted by piles of debris, but he did not want to risk exposing himself to getting a better view. Raiders may be stupid, but they were armed and dangerous, and in many cases insane enough to rush a missile-wielding unicorn with nothing better than a pole in their mouths. Since Falcon refused to fire first, his rules of engagement were strict and tactical. Steiner would have approved. Maybe. The argument was one-sided. The irate raider, a deep-voiced stallion by the sound of it, bombarded their companion with swears of increasing volume. Falcon half expected their heads to explode into a red mist by a sniper hiding out in one of the taller buildings. It had actually certainly solved the noise problem, but it was so messy. Falconwing spotted what the gray pony was so angry about. A mare, unconscious, possibly dead, was lying on the floor before the two. Her off-white coat was covered in blood. Suddenly the motivation to think of snide comments deriding the intelligence of raiders evaporated. He had to act, and act fast, before that pony out there really did set up his rifle and take aim. He couldn't help that mare. If he was going to end up in the crosshairs of an enemy, he couldn't even see. Falcon hung low on the ground as he prowled, using the obstacles ahead to mask his approach. The vulgar raider continued to spew vulgarities, and their companion remained silent, sitting on their haunches until the tirade ended. Falconwing couldn't determine what had started all of this. And quite frankly, he didn't care. He saw two raiders and an unconscious bystander. What he assumed to be a bystander. It occurred to him that acting without understanding sucked. Sucked a lot. At that, but the more he delayed, the greater the likelihood that something terrible was going to happen. He was only in the wasteland for just under half a month, and he knew this. He'd seen this unwritten law demonstrated numerous times during his time with the two stallions. Granted, during that time the stakes only got as high as snagging a few extra cans of beets before the raider realized they were being robbed from right under their noses. Not the life of another innocent pony. Just over a few yards away, and the raider's voice was almost deafening. What did they have as a cutie mark? An explosion? Falcon hoped not. He had enough experience with things going boom on that first day. He steeled his nerves, controlled his breathing, and maneuvered ever closer, taking cover along the rusted blue panels of a wagon, the last thing between him and his target. Then he presented himself to strike, his hind legs tensed. He angled himself upwards with his forelegs, channeling his memories of flight. Falconwing launched himself over the wagon, his coat catching the air, fluttering and billowing up behind him in a flash of bravado. "The fuck is that?" the bellowing raider exclaimed as they heard the flap of fabric and saw the filthy red pony soaring at them, overcoat trailing his figurative flight. The raider threw theirself into a roll, Falcon's hooves crashing down where they stood a second before. What happened next was purely the result of adrenaline coursing through the red colt's veins. Their heads whooped around, drawing a pistol from their holster. A scooped black and red gun with a cylinder barrel and stocky grip. Launched out of their mouth by a powerful two-legged kick straight into their chops. Spittle followed the weapon as it went through the air. Falcon had spun on a hoof, his rear legs lashing out at the raider. The kick did not have enough force to put them down instantly. He was no klaxon. He was no earth pony. Period. Not yet, at least. The blow, while managing to disarm the raider, made them angrier than they were before. "I'm gonna fuck you up, boy!" the raider roared. Falcon's adrenaline-improved senses took in the pony's features. Somewhat stockier build, long, unruly mane, narrow snout. Oh dear Celestia, this stallion was really a mare. He was a flurry of kicks, striking her in the side, the head, the ribs, and the chest, shouting something along the lines of "No" repeatedly, bobbing and weaving in between the grey pony's attempt at retaliation. He was so fast, yet it seemed like an eternity to the colt. Finally, the raider fell to the ground, bruised and exhausted. A flash of fear was in her eyes. Definitely a her this time, we know that. "Don't kill me, you crazy bastard," she spat. Her voice was more like a grating than the cheese grater. Did she get a shot in the throat, and never fully recover from something? "And what about that mare over there?" Falcon shot back, keeping his voice at considerably safer level. "Did she beg for her life too?" Falcon stopped himself before he could go further, immediately dropping into a combat stance to face the caramel-colored raider. They only stared at him, dumbfounded with green, cloudy eyes. Another mare. A young one, too, just a few years older than him. Her mane and tail were a deep violet color. She didn't even go for the weapon, just a few feet away. Falcon raised a brow at her, but then returned to focus, to the defeated grey pony. She was trying to stand up. Worse still, she looked like she was trying to speak again. Falcon spun, bucked. Crisis averted. "Is she dead?" said the caramel mare. Her voice was a tiny, tiny thing. The red colt didn't answer immediately. Having feared he really did kill her with that last kick, the barely noticeable heaving of her chest was a relief, though. "Nah, she'll just get the night in her head. She'll be fine," he replied. He knocked her out. She'd get to know true peace for a little while. It was more than a raider deserved. Wham! That small pistol had an ear-shattering roar that pierced the wasteland air. The small bullet had burrowed beneath the grey mare's head, with an almost surgical bullet wound to show for it. Dark red was pooling underneath the previously unconscious raider. Falcon didn't realize until several moments later that his jaw had dropped. His mind kept replaying the events to him, the question, his reply, and then that noise that made him quiver in his biting. It took a while longer for him to hear the noise coming from the trembling mare. The gun was clucking in her teeth. She dropped it to the floor. Tears came, but she wasn't sobbing. "That's my mother over there, you know. She shot her and tried to take me with her. Tried to make me a raider, a slave." Falcon pulled himself together. That was unexpected. But he could lament about that later, when he wasn't in danger of being sniped and was swarmed by the local raider pack. "Help me get her into one of these buildings." "I'll help her." It is best not to think about how things could have turned out, especially when there was nothing that could be done to change the result. It's not like one could preserve an instance of their life and revisit it after the fact to do something different. Surgical bullet wounds was no hyperbole. The slender-barreled pistol fired 10mm rounds, and did so with such power that the small-caliber rounds could penetrate an unarmored target and exit the other side. Falcon Wing was careful to tape the weapon and any ammo the grey mare might have had on her as a preemptive measure. He wasn't going to pull a gun on another pony, if he could help it, and no pony was going to happen across such a weapon and its ammunition passed through the street. Falcon was thankful that the caramel mare's mother wasn't shot through the head, or attempting to revive her would have been for nothing. Luckily, the bullet fired went into her and through her chest cavity, grazing her heart, and no doubt causing all sorts of complications in her body. It was no means painless, and Falcon was sure the unconscious mare felt great suffering before slipping into shock. But the grievous wound was survivable. There would be no bullet to worry about that. Falcon Wing had the power of magical science in a bottle. He propped the light grey mare's head up, opened her mouth, and gingerly poured the newly opened health potion down her throat. All his previous guilt about stealing from raiders, that was gone. He wasn't using his pilfered goods on himself to make sure that he made it through this hell. He was using it to help others, and that made it okay in some twist of logic and morality. He would have to thank Klaxon for doing such a good job packing his supplies. Speaking of which, he'd have to ask about the note he found in his saddlebags. Plug goggles into any spell matrix terminal. What the hell? Carmel, Falcon's unspoken nickname for the young mare because she had yet to tell her name, glanced between the door and the hooded colt, who became an impromptu medic. They had retreated to the building, just across the street from the incident, locked the door, and Falcon wasted no extra time getting to work. In hindsight, locking the door really didn't do anything. The building used to be a pharmacy. That was hatred for irony again. And it had a large broken display window letting the gloomy light from outside shine in black and white tiled flooring. Falcon and his patient were behind the counter, and Carmel was lookout, hiding in the dark corner, on the wall where the counter extended out from the sad yellow mare. The image posted above them. It was, if the pink-maned elder with grey in her hair was looking down at the red colt's efforts, and it was breaking her heart. Okay, that should do it, Falcon thought, backing away from the injured mare to inspect his hoofwork. Medical bandages wrapped around her upper torso. A small red circle formed on either side where the bullet wounds were. They are like targets for where her heart is. All the shooter had to do is... Nope, not thinking about that. Bad, Falcon Wing. Very, very bad. The old mare stirred. Falcon Wing felt a strange sensation in his chest. Anxiousness? Anticipation? Hope. He realized with a small smile. It was only as large as he dared to let himself smile. The wasteland was so very good at making ponies frown and cry. The light grey pony groaned. Hoofsteps, rapid ones, ensued. Carmel slid to a stop at Falcon's side. He cringed. Sound itself felt like his arch-nemesis, which is to be expected because of his emphasis on stealth. Still, he couldn't blame the young mare for her reaction. Elena? The off-white mare asked weakly. Mother! Elena repeated tenderly, leaning close. The reaction the off-white mare had left much to be desired. Oh, my sweet Luna, you are a raider! She cried out, her wide green eyes pouring tears. Falcon's semblance of a smile was gone in a split second. No, he said, bristling, between the mare's echoing shrieks and the fact that she thought her daughter was a raider. The wingless Pegasus's thoughts were everywhere. Oh, merciful Celestia, who the hell are you? She cried out, scrambling away from Falcon Wing and stiffly hitting the wall. She was sobbing and gasping for breath. A hoof held over her chest. In an instant, her breaths had become shallow and labored. Falcon Wing recoiled in horror. She was having heart complications. Her shock was too much for her still-beating heart. She was going to die, and he didn't know what to do. Elena was at her mother's side, holding her and weeping. Falcon shut eyes as tight as he could and stamped his hoof into a tile, wishing it had shattered under hoof, but it hadn't. All he had to do was to show his anger, frustration, and immense sadness was an echoing clop. Tears began trickling down his cheek and snout. Maybe I should have spent all the time I had reading apprenticing with Victor Patchfix. Maybe then I would be worth a damn in this situation. His mind roared at him. In time, the grasping of shallow breaths stopped. Only the sounds of crying remained. Falcon never even got to know her name. He only saw her cutie mark. 3 dark grey streaks running across her thighs. On the outskirts of hope again, Falcon looked down at his hoofwork, with Elena standing beside him. In the irradiated soil, another pony was laid to rest. A large rock used as the marker. Elena carved in the words with a combat knife Falcon loaned her. He really had to thank Caxon for packing his bags. Fog Chaser, victim of a fragile heart. Falcon scuffed the ground with his right hoof. Head hung low. The hood pulled forth further, so that it was practically resting on his snout. Another pony he helped to the ground. At least he did it before she was a skeleton. It isn't your fault, he heard Elena say. He looked up to her. She was looking off into the distance, the deadened landscape rolling out in all directions, past the distant buildings, dipping and rising in the peripheral gloom. It depressed Falconwing that her eyes wandered to the bleak horizon after she paid her final respects to her mother. Maybe, if he had taken off the hood, she would have calmed down. You jumped in to fight a raider and help wayward strangers. What happened after, you couldn't have done anything about. You didn't know, Fog Chaser, about her condition, Elena said, still looking off into the wild, wide yonder. Condition? Falcon asked, doing his best to not sound downtrodden. She nodded and her gaze lowered to the ground. It came off like she was trying to avoid looking at him. Another wave of hurt. Ow. She was always tense and easily startled. A heart condition she had since she was a foal, Elena explained, lifting a hoof to wipe away the last of her tears. Out of every possible place to shoot, the bitch had got shot in the chest, Falcon thought, feeling a surge of anger within its core. His hatred of irony was all but absolute now. It was no wonder Elena shot the Grey Raider. Was there anything ironic about getting through the head? Oh, right. She was shot with her own gun. Fitting. Irony was something redeemed in the Colt's eye. Somewhat. The caramel mare sighed. I blame myself, really. I should have taken this disgusting thing off as soon as I got the chance. But I was so scared and nervous. Her expression darkened as she looked at the brown and black leather. As much as she hated what it represented, Falcon had to disagree. Some armor is better than nothing, Elena, Falconwing said, addressing her by name for the first time. She gave him an odd look, one that conveyed both uneasiness and pain. Right, she hadn't told him her name. It was kind of weird that he found out from her mother just before she died. That, and the fact that he was telling her that wearing raider armor was a better alternative to going bareback. While true in theory, he remembered his own actions during the fight. Had she even moved an inch, he would have assumed she was an enemy, based on her barding, and he fought with his hooves. He didn't even want to consider what an armed pony would do. Imagining bouts of misfortune for tactical purposes was Steiner's specialty. On second thought, forget I said anything. Let's talk about something more pressing, said the wingless Pegasus. Elena looked at the grave one last time, touched a hoof on the stone, then nodded. Where are you headed before things happened? Falcon asked, cursing his thoughts. I am so bad at this. Mother and I, we were trying to get out of Hope. Slavers had attacked our compound a few days ago. We escaped and were taking refuge amongst the rubble, hoping they would move on, and we could find our way to another settlement, New Appaloosa, or Junction R7 maybe? Elena answered. Falcon did not know a thing about those places. Well, we made it out, didn't we? Left our place behind? She asked. She forced a smile onto her face. Falcon wanted to scream. He desperately needed a mattress to vent into. I am so unbelievably sorry. Are we really going to go through this again? The caramel mare said, sighing thereafter.
I already said it wasn't your fault. It wasn't yours either, damn it! But I just can't help it. It was just so sad to watch... to know I was there, unable to do anything to help, he exclaimed, his voice much louder than he had intended. Elena was stunned. The fiery anger extinguished when she saw her expression, replaced with a spine-tingling chill. Falcon drooped, hanging his head. Where were those mattresses when they were most needed? Why were you heading to Hope, stranger? Elena said, a short while later. Falcon Wing was thankful for the second attempt to change the subject. He raised his head and looked at her. It was probably stupid, but did you know ponies by the names of Klaxon and Steiner? I guess I wanted to see where they came from. They're alive? Elena said, her expression barely greatly with a squee. I haven't seen them since I was a filly. That's a yes, then, the red colt thought. That meant that the previous home that his friends had fallen to slavers just a few days ago, when he left on his quest to do good. Fuck irony. They're going through a tough time right now, but yes, they're alive. They live around Ponyville, though. Bit of an unpleasant place, if I do say so myself, Falcon said, trying not to linger on the revelation. Hope might not be too different after the slavers, Elena replied. Don't remind me, Falconwing said. There went his plan for the day, or not. Without warning, he shoved his face into his saddlebag and pulled out the slender-barreled pistol. Putting it down on Elena's hooves, he finished out 5 clips of 10mm bullets. Take this. Get yourself somewhere safe. Appaloosa, or R7, whichever would be safer for you. You save a lady, bury your mother, and then send her on her way. You're very strange, stranger, said the colonel mayor. The name is Falcon Wing, and it's for your own good, the red colt replied. How so? Elena inquired. Because I'm going in there and fleeing those slaves. They might have taken your home days ago, but they didn't leave. And now that I know this, like hell if I'll let them out without a fight. Elena contemplated this for a short while, and then said, I want to help. Those are my friends and acquaintances in there, waiting to be shipped off to who knows where. Falcon regarded her strangely. I have no plan. This might be suicide, she admitted. Are you sure you want to commit? You want me to leave you without returning the favor, after you jumped in all so heroically to fight off that slaver? Elena said teasingly, before adding with a lot more serious in her tone. I already told you I know the ponies captured. I want to help them. All right then, Falcon replied. This was going to happen. Blazing hearts are admirable. A beating heart is preferable. A pony who relies solely on their fighting spirit will become one prematurely. A raider with a sniper rifle. Falcon was wary of the possibility earlier, but his emotional turmoil had made him forget about it. Naturally, he was reminded by the cracking retort of a gun, just moments after he had turned a street corner in the Mains of Hope. He was back behind the building at the end of the block, standing on his rear legs, bracing against the wall when a bullet embedded itself on the sidewalk. A cloud of dust was ejected from the ground, a fairly large pockmark at the point of impact. Falconwing looked to Elena. Yeah, we're not going that way, he said. The mare nodded very quickly, a violet mane dancing on her head and neck. They backtracked into an alley, and from there navigated a maze of corridors and passages, weaving through the alleyways in a roundabout fashion. After some time of this, the red colt and caramel mare had managed to approach the building where the sniper had made their nest. Standing just outside on the ground floor, there was no way for the pony to know the duo had slipped into their blind spot. I could use that gun, Elena whispered to Falconwing. Why was she whispering? Falcon had no idea, but appreciated her attempt to be stealthy. Too bad they were standing in plain sight. Falcon Wing was quick to correct this, however, beckoning her into the dimness of the structure they stood outside of. Once in the protective embrace of the shadow, Falcon whispered, "Didn't take your remarks, Marilena." "You never take a look at my cutie mark, Falcon. You would have known it if you did," she replied. This was very true. "Right. Sorry. So much has happened I haven't been able to spare your flanks to look. When is it?" Elena looked taken aback. Was she blushing? It was difficult to tell how in low light, but Falcon Wing could see red in the caramel pony's pink cheeks. Was it something he said? "Something wrong?" he asked, looking somewhat concerned. "Oh, no, just never mind," Elena stammered. She turned her side towards the red colt. From what he could see, her cutie mark was a splotch of yellow, vaguely in the shape of a maple leaf, its jagged edges facing towards her front. It took him a few seconds to understand. "Muzzle flash," he said with a realization. "Bingo," she replied, smirking. She then raised a brow and added, "Well, I showed you mine. Show me yours." "Never got to see it on account of that coat, in addition to past events." "There's nothing to see. Still a blank flank," Falcon Wing said, feeling a tiny twinge of embarrassment, and relatively preparing himself for mocking. There wasn't any, though. "Quite the late bloomer you are then, Mr. Hero," she said in good humor. Falcon smiled that small smile of his. The two snuck their way up the darkened stairway, where small cracks and breaks in the walls allowed small rays of grey light into the rectangular spiral of metal. The buildings may have been a manufacturing facility. Passing open doors and various floors, they saw various levels of what might have been a crevasse of concrete and steel, with catwalks sprawling overhead. As a Pegasus pony, Falcon Wing appreciated the aesthetics, but still recognized the huge danger presented both past and present. "Top floor." "Top floor." "Stay here while I go and take a look ahead. Make sure it's all clear," Falcon Wing whispered. "And why must you go on ahead while I hide by the stairs?" Elena asked. "Because I'm light on my hooves, and if things look grim behind that door, I'll be back to call this whole thing off," Falcon Wing replied. "We're already planning to take on grossly unfair odds by fighting slavers. No need to add fighting an entire group of raiders to the list of unrealistic goals." "Okay then, Mr. Optimistic," the caramel mare said, and then grinned. The wingless Pegasus had seen this mare at her saddest not too long ago, and now she was joking and grinning. She had a lot riding on freeing the ponies in her compound, and she was trying to keep in good spirits. If they failed, Falcon Wing feared she would never smile again. Falcon Wing turned, opened the door to the stairway just a crack, and looked around into the hallway beyond. The corridor's walls were colored in blue paint that now chipped. Old papers stuck into various bulletin boards, some littering the dirty yellow tiles that made up the floor. There were a few benches, some still standing with their backs to the walls as they should be, others having been tossed about and now lay wherever they had landed. Someone hadn't been a happy pony. Falcon slipped through the door silently and closed it behind him. 4 raiders, excluding the one at the window came. 4 raiders down and unconscious, caught by surprise, and put in sleeper holds. Strangely, both literally and figuratively, any call for help that would alert them to all this presence otherwise. After each takedown, however, images of Klaxon crushing their throats with a devastating buck, and Elena shooting them in the head flashed through his mind. He wasn't a killer, and he didn't choose to be one. But these were ponies that had no problems with worrying the remains of dead and tortured the living. Was it a wasteland requisite to be a judge, jury, and executioner? This a conundrum the stable dweller had dealt with, clearing arbor cannibals. Falcon made his way back to the door. about to put his hoof on the handle when the thought occurred to him. Elena had the gun he had come to call the pea-shooter. To counteract the irony of the wasteland, however, if he just opened the door, there was a distinct possibility he'd get shot by the very gun he named and gave it to the mare he saved, because he might think he was a raider. Would that be double irony, then? And since when did I start turning into Steiner? He thought. He reared up and looked into the crack in dust-coated window pane near the top of the door. "Elena, it's me, don't shoot," he said, as loudly as he could, forward, and then cautiously opened the door. Elena had the pea-shooter in her mouth. Falcon's nose almost bumped the tip of the barrel when he dropped onto all fours. Poof! She looked through the gun's grip. Falcon Wing, able to see the corners of her mouth, lifted into a smile, while his heart skipped a beat. Elena put the gun back in her Barding's holster, allowing Falcon Wing to take time to shake off his surprise. "Well, that was suitably horrifying. Please do not do that again. Ever." Even the purest of heart can become monsters. For the sake of good, they wade in a river of blood from their fallen foes. There is little peace to be made with this fact. Elena gave each now dead pony a look of disgust as she passed them. She had no reservations as Falcon Wing, and did what he refused to do, stopping their skulls and throats. The red colt turned away each time her hooves went down, but the sounds were preserved in his memory, vivid and harsh, breaking bones and the squishing of flesh. They were not good sounds. This mare perplexed Falcon. She was handling her grief in a way he hadn't since seen. Himself, actually, after news of his parents reached him, he had his outpouring of grief, but that was only the beginning of a long road of emotional and eventually physical pain. He knew what she was going through in ways she couldn't even imagine. Knew that she was doing her best to keep strong in this world that devours the weak. It's why he avoided the subject of Fog Chaser, so she would not have to expose her sadness, so that she can put on her cheery ruse and go on with her life until she was ready to open up about the matter. Her brutality, on the other hoof, was something he worried about, but could not change the subject to. A raider shot her mother and tried to force her into a life of depravity. It was understandable. But then again, he knew killing another pony was not an easy decision to make, so for her to do so 4 times in rapid succession after her initial execution of the Grey Raider in the streets was troubling, to say the least. Was she being consumed by bloodlust? As if she read his mind, she said slowly, "I'm not doing this because I lost my mother. I'm doing this because if you don't kill them, they're going to kill you, and you knocking them out will only make them more ruthless." Falcon Wing sighed, begrudgingly admitting to himself she had a point. There was no resolution to the moral dilemma. He objected to killing. The raiders did not. In fact, they reveled in the blackest depths of pony nature. It was inevitable that one day, soon, stealth and non-lethal incapacitation would not suffice. It was inevitable that one day, soon, he would have to draw Klaxon's gun and take another life to save his own. "How do you manage?" Falcon inquired as the two walked down the hall, trying to keep his gaze from falling on the red smear of Elena's left hoof. "Manage what?" "I don't need to explain," Falcon replied, a hint of impatience in his voice. The issue was eating at him, the anticipation of that preordinate event set in stone. When or where, irrelevant. "I think about all the things raiders as a whole have done, carving up ponies, desecrating everything they touch. There are things in the Evergreen Forest that are less monstrous than raiders. Then I think about the ponies I am saving by putting them down," Elena said sternly. "But they're still ponies," Falcon Wing said meekly. "Did you think that you could sneak into a slaver camp and do your fancy shadow tricks, pick them off one by one, without them getting suspicious and coming after you?" Elena asked, giving the red colt a critical gaze. In the back of Falcon's mind, he answered yes, be it from arrogance or wishful thinking. Crouching doesn't make you invisible, and once they find a body, they won't just write it off as the wind or their eyes playing tricks on them. They will hunt you, and if they find you, they will gut you, she continued, her voice taking on a cold edge. Falcon nodded. I'm not prepared for what we're going to do. I'm not prepared for murder for the greater good, but I'm not backing out now. Too much is at stake. More innocent lives will be destroyed. I don't mind any of you bad ones, Falcon said, more to himself than to his companion. It was a sad truth. They came up to the room where the raider with their high-powered rifles sat scoring the street for their next victim. Their location was betrayed by a soft muttering that trailed down the hall, an unsettling murmur, as if from a phantom. But there was no spectre at work in what remained of this factory. Just the mad rambling of a mangy stallion with a very dangerous toy. The door to the room he sat in was missing its door, allowing the somber gray stallion light of the wasteland day to shine in, and his shadow was sprawling out of the room and across the hall where it climbed up the wall. The color of his pelt was black, not his natural coat color. He was just very filthy. Falcon gave Elena a look, almost a pleading one. He was begging her, with his sad orange eyes, for another way. She looked away from him and put her bent hoof to the face. The red colt's expression immediately flashed to worry, and he reached out for her, stopping just short of her coat. This was neither the time nor the place to deal with this. He whispered, "Stay out of sight. I'll be quick." And before she could reply, he was slinking off into the room. Elena wept for the colt, wept for his innocence. The way he carried himself, showered, showed that he was not well versed with the true tragedy of the wasteland. She assumed the skills were the work of Klaxon and Steiner. Because of this, she thought he was from a stable, another pony who wished to do good and would end up losing the things that made them decent for the greater cause. She was pulled from her silent sorrow by the sound of his voice. Hi," he had said again. Elena immediately tensed. Wasn't this pony all about sticking to darkness and staying quiet? She drew the pea shooter and jumped down into the doorway, and the maddening mantra of a raider turned into a tirade of obscenities. The raider spun around, the long black rifle in his right of his battle saddle, unwieldy for such rapid movements. Falcon was already cutting across the room in a wide arc, closing in on the raider's left. Elena was surprised by his speed. Spin, buck. The momentum behind the red colt translated into a staggering blow that knocked the filthy earth pony off his hooves and onto his battle saddle. The weapon going off on impact, Elena yelped, the wall just off to her side having a hole punched through it. But her grip on the pea shooter remained firm. Falcon's ears were ringing from the loud blast. One shot to the head kept the raider from getting up. "What were you thinking?" Elena scolded Falcon as they left the factory some time after. She was clad in her sniper battle saddle, ammo looted from the previous owner, and elsewhere in the building. "I was thinking I'd do the one thing I haven't yet. I was thinking I could talk to him, but I didn't even get out a sentence before he was trying to blow me apart," Falcon replied with a suppressed rage. Elena's own anger relented at that. A hard realization occurred to her. There really is no helping it. It's kill or be killed, and that is so fucking stupid. He hoped to let his fury boil away on the way to the compound. By then, the wasteland would be darkening with the coming of night, the perfect time to strike against the slavers occupying it.
One can draw strength from their emotions, but it is meaningless without self-control. Control marks the difference between righteous retaliation and ravenous rage. The compound itself was just that, a compound, with a wall of metal sheets, concrete blocks, wood, any wasteland junk that could be fastened together with magic and ingenuity to make a respectable barrier, complete with a watchtower that was an old sky chariot embedded in the side of an overlooking building, supported by other bits of scrap. A genuine wasteland fortress. One that had fallen. It needed a dumpster, Falcon thought jokingly, though it was biting humor, dark humor. He was still very angry, and the gray clouds had brightened up into orange and red at the sunset, still unseen in the west. The bright colors seemed to emulate the burning he felt in his soul, and he wanted to act on it, to rush into the compound and give every rotten pony in there what they wanted. A furious young colt with a gun that had reached his limit and was ready to bring a reckoning like no other. Elena put a hoof on his shoulder, and Falcon Wing was roped from his daydream of violence. Her face was sullen, realizing that he was standing in a combat stance with his coat bristling. The red colt quickly came to his senses. This was not the first time something like that had happened in the last hours of daylight. Before, Falcon Wing had fallen back into lapses of inattentiveness, wrapped in his thoughts, and blocking out Elena as she spoke to him. It happened numerous times before he became frustrated with the red pony and ceased. In the silence, the drive to act only swelled and became more evident in how the wingless Pegasus carried himself. Please, Falcon Wing, I know you're upset, but you have to try to focus on something else. I can't have you be blinded by your anger when we do this, Elena implored. The two had taken shelter in a building just a few blocks away from the hall, half of the factory's height. Elena was sitting in the shadows before the approached building, and Falcon Wing seemed drawn to the broken windows, orange eyes reflecting the scarlet clouds, bathing in the warmer light of sunset. His response to the caramel mare was infuriatingly simple. "I'm angry?" the young colt asked. Being the victim most of his life, he wasn't used to feeling the way he did. The urge to hurt and break, and do to others what had been done to him, and repay the wasteland for throwing his attempts at goodness in his face. Yes, you are, and it will be the death of you if you don't snap out of it, the caramel-colored mare admonished him. His experiences in the wasteland all came rushing at him. The unimaginable fear he felt as he was ambushed by figures in the dark, the nerve-rending pain as they cleaved off his wings, the shock when he saw how sick raiders can be, so many soul-wrenching sights and encounters, the look Fog Chaser had on her face when her heart gave out. It was impossible for him to calm down. His body trembled. It was the prelude to him crying, as it had been before. He was fighting himself, willing himself to stay still. Caught up in his own inner conflict, eyes still directed at the burning skies, he was unaware that Elena had circled around him. Without warning, she pounced on him. The two tumbled in the darkness, Elena ending up pinning the red colt under her, staring intently into his face. Now she was angry. Her tears flowed down the side of her face through an emerald glare. Falcon returned the look, confused and caught off guard. It was as if the two had fallen into a cycle of perpetual tension where they pissed each other off exponentially. Falcon Wing entered the emotional staring contest, turning his head and looking off to the side wall. Chipped white paint, and a picture frame lying face down, concealing broken glass, no doubt. The most interesting of sights, surely. "Get off me," Falcon said with what might have been a snore, paused, then added, "Please?" "My mother walked this road and paid for it with her life," Elena began to say. Falcon's eyes widened. He did not like where this conversation was going. Off, get up, please, Cuff," he exclaimed, refusing to look at her in the eyes. Her heart was weak, yet it was what led her in this world, always reacting to her feelings instead of thinking things through. It's why the mere thought of her daughter being a raider did what it did. She assumed the worst without any rational thought. Elena continued with a level voice, even as Falcon was stricken by the teardrops landing on his cheeks. Tears that were not his. "So you can have your anger, but I'll be damned By Celestia, if I allow you to get yourself hurt because you too hell-bent on thinking of your own well-being. More so if I allow you to become no better than a raider when you lose yourself to it, she finished, forebodingly, leaning close to say the last part directly into his ears, so that he could not drown her out of his thoughts. With that, she eased herself off him, and walked back to the aged wooden bench behind the counter, laying herself down on top of it. Falcon didn't get up from the floor, staring blankly at the wall and its chipped paint. Dusk had fallen when Falconwing scraped himself off the ground, walked the few feet to where Elena lay, and then sat on his haunches. He hung his head, looking apologetic, though he doubted the caramel mare could see the regret in his expression. He wanted to say something to her, something to convey just how truly awful he felt for everything. From ignoring her to forcing her to say things she hadn't. He felt like a monster for even thinking the things he had. What if I really did have those things? He thought, horrified of himself. He stood at the edge of the madness. He had peered into Phoenix fire within him, and he was nearly scalded. That was the start of a long fall, wasn't it? The threshold before that abysmal pit that the wasteland pulled any pony into. An unimaginably long plummet that stripped every virtue from a pony's soul. He shuddered, a myriad of thoughts and feelings about himself clouding his mind. All of them were not good. The sobbing started once more. Elena watched, bearing a pained expression, but did not intervene. It was something that needed to happen, so she let it. Despite her sadness, she smiled a small smile. Falconwing knew she had returned. Cautiously, the two ponies made their move on the compound. Elena had an easier time moving in the darkness. Seriously, did everyone have better night eyes than Falconwing? With a hooded colt following close behind. This changed once they infiltrated the settlement, however. If one could call walking through the open gate infiltrating, and stayed true to their roles. Elena was cover fire with her rifle. Falcon was to find a free angle to get the captives out. That objective was not too hard to complete. The residents of the compound were loaded up on a large passenger wagon in plain sight, just over 30 feet away. A burly earth pony was already strapped in, ready to pull. Perfect timing, the two ponies thought simultaneously. The slaver guards had left their posts, anticipating their departure from the compound not too long from now. They were loading up crates of supplies, no doubt plundered from this compound, stolen from those they had captured. Falcon felt the simmering beneath his coat, but focused on his objective. It was kill or be killed. Whirled, but that didn't mean it was time for a first strike. He observed his surroundings to formulate a specific plan of attack. The compound's wall blocked off a large part of the city with two gates, a forward and back entrance, allowing ponies to pass to and fro down the street, bisecting the settlement. Their homes had been the buildings encompassed by the enclosure, using the rooms available like small apartments. There were street lights that didn't shine anymore, lining on the main street. Elena had the home field advantage. She disappeared in the darkness to that spot. She would undoubtedly give the mayor ample coverage of the area. Falcon assumed the watchtower would have been said spot, but a quick look at the testament to the wasteland engineering confirmed that she was not there. The hooded pony slunk up close to the cart, slowly, methodically, careful where he put his hooves. The slavers were none the wiser. Arrogance, self-assurance, both would be their downfall. They numbered only 5, excluding the one strapped to the cart. As far as Falcon was concerned, he was a non-combatant. They had gathered off to one side of the cart while Falconwing made his way up to the other, the ponies inside also oblivious to his presence. They were herded into a large rusted cage with half a barrel fastened to the reddish bars. The dried-up remains of old food encrusted the insides. The ponies of various colors were all given rags to wear, their new uniforms for whatever their destination was, the clothes of their enforced toil. Falconwing scowled and crawled under the wagon. Not if he could help it. He put his head under his overcoat, reached into one of his bags, and pulled out a combat knife from his mouth.
He used the blade as a screwdriver. Careful prying the bolts secured the wagon's rear right axle. He did not remove them completely, just enough so the wheel would be extremely unstable when it started moving. He gave the left wheel the same treatment, then scurried out from under the cart. He put the knife back in his bag, then put his little plane into motion. He crept up behind the burly pony, making sure he was unseen until the last moment. He turned around and swung his rear hooves up into where it would hurt the most. The muscular stallion cried out in pain. Falcon scampered off, the sounds of his hooves clapping against asphalt, getting the attention of the slavers. "What the hell?" one of them shouted. "Fuck it! Get on the wagon and let's get the fuck out of here!" another replied. They jumped up on the wagon, grappling another cage for support. "Start! Get moving, dust cloud!" the same slaver barked at the pained stallion. Fighting against the pain, the pony started his gallop, only to have his wagon sway and wiggle out of control behind him, the rear wheel sliding off and rolling forward. The wagon came down hard. The cage rattled, and prisoners cried out in surprise. The slavers jumped up off their crippled ride and went to draw their firearms on Falcon Wing. The crack of the rifle rang out in the night. 6 shots fired from the roof of a nearby building. Each shot met their mark. Is it possible to have peace of mind in a world ravaged by war? When Falcon Wing's eyes fluttered open that 4th morning, he was looking upon a ceiling. A ceiling! Not the cloudy skies he had seen for 3 months, straight when he woke up, wherever he decided to lay down the night before. He was in a small bed, one that was clean and comfortable. He was lying on his back. He saw his overcoat draped on a dresser in front of him. Cloxon's goggles were on a table to his right. His head was on a pillow. An actual pillow, not a garbage bag! "Oh good, I must be dead," he said to himself. "I wonder if it went quick." "I don't know about you dying, but you went to sleep pretty quick once you got in that bed," Elena said gleefully. Her face appeared from the side of his vision. Falcon had a start at her sudden appearance. She wasn't wearing the raider barding anymore. She had a patty grey tunic on, with a bit of repurposed scrap metal plating protecting the shoulders, sides, and knees. Her holster was on her left leg, as opposed to on her other armor. Resting smugly in it was the pea-shooter. The battle saddle was nowhere to be seen. "Oh, good morning, Elena," he said once again. "Morning, Mr. Hero," she said with a wide grin. Falcon cringed. "I don't deserve that nickname," he said sheepishly. "Not after—" "I'm sure the ponies of hope would beg to differ, since you did save them from slavers," Elena countered. Falcon had those green eyes filled with sadness and tears. Now they were bright and joyous. "You were amazing. You were right under them, literally, and they didn't even notice." "You saved them. I just broke their wagon," Falcon retorted. Elena raised a brow at him, with a flash of determination in her eyes, said, "Well, you won't accept your part in saving an entire community, but at least you can't deny you saved me. And for the briefest moment, my mother too." She smiled and leaned in close to him. "Can you debate that, Mr. Hero?" she said, chuckling after. "Brief isn't good enough. I should have been able to do more, to do better," Falcon Wing muttered. "I shouldn't have been so mean to you." "You only meant well." Elena put a hoof forcefully to his chest, stopping him mid-sentence. "You were trying to reason with ponies who couldn't be reasoned with. You were willing to try diplomacy before giving a raider the bullet they deserve. You were trying to stay good, and only got the short end of the stick for it. So you got mad, really mad at that. I understand, but I don't blame you for it. I was only worried that you'd end up hurting yourself and—" She gave him a pleasant smile. "I like Falcon Wing who only wants to help, not to hunt. Even though he might have to one day. At least I'll know he didn't want to do it." Falcon Wing mulled over her words and then brushed her hoof off him. "The ponies in the cage?" he asked. "I shot the lock off with pea-shooter and helped them back on the slavers took. The townsfolk gave you a big reward for the help, some potions, food, bandages, and some ammo we got off the slavers for your gun. Elena replied. Falcon nodded absent-mindedly. That's kind of them, he said, and then asked, Why don't I remember any of this? I don't know, the colonel there said with a shrug. You were really out of it by the time I got you from my perch. You went through a lot yesterday, so you must be tuckered out, but that ain't really surprising. I see, Falcon said. My turn to ask a question, Elena said, kneeling down beside the bed and resting her chin on her forelegs. What is it? When were you going to tell me you were a Pegasus? Falconwing glanced away from Elena to his overcoat, then back to her. His eyes went wide, pupils shrinking, mortified. He felt strangely naked without it on, even though he still had his tunic on. It's funny. All this time I thought you were a stable pony, like the one man running across the wastes. I bring you in here on my back, get you into bed, and take off that coat of yours, and then see. I thought you had some poor tape victim, or that you got yourself exposed to too much radiation. Then I recognized them. Those were your wings. Falconwing's mouth opened to speak of nothing, but came out. He sighed and closed it again. There were no words he could say in response. They were signs, though. Pretty small for an earth pony, you know. Pretty fast and light on your hooves, for one, too. You still got plenty of Pegasus in you. She nuzzled his stub where his plumage was starting to return. Did it hurt you a lot? At that, the words came too easily. Like a bitch, Falcon answered honestly, rolling off of the bed thereafter. His saddlebags were right beside it. He picked one up, fastening it to his side, and then did the same to the other one. He then grabbed his coat, put it on, and retrieved his goggles, having the lenses rest on his forehead, as always, once they were well on. Heading out already? Elena asked as he suited up. Might as well, Falcon replied when he finished, and just about ready to walk to the door, go on the handle, he looked back at her one last time before he opened it. Not even going to say goodbye to any pony? What a strange hero you are, Mr. Hero. It's Falconwing, Elena. Just Falconwing. The blank Pegasus without his wings, the redcoat replied. And goodbye. Good luck. I hope you do find a pony that you can call hero, 'cause I'm not them. He pushed down the handle, opened the door, and stepped through, finding himself in a ruined hallway. A set of stairs flew off to his left. He started walking down the ruined stairs in an oppressive dark grey gloom, rays of light shining through the cracked walls. Stairs. Stairs never change.
Last words. Make the most of them. A life is but a day in the wasteland. It had been 18 days since Falcon became part of the Equestrian wasteland. 8 days since he last saw Klaxon and Steiner. 5 days since he saw Elena. On the 19th day, the Pegasi descended. Operation Cauterize. The day the Enclave returned to Equestria after 200 years. A day of death. Falconwing woke up the day after to a cloudy, wasteland morn at the base of a dead tree. A few minutes later, he was fiddling with his goggles. So, what's this business about a spell matrix? He asked himself as he inspected them. He was the epitome of a lost soul now, a wanderer who had yet to truly wander. Being a pony was hard. Over 5 days, he started doing good deeds, helping a beggar, running a few errands for the occasional pony he met that did not want him dead on sight, avoiding wild automatons that saw his need win a few extra holes all the while. At the end of the day, however, he couldn't shake the fact that he wasn't a hero. He was no stable dweller. He was Falconwing, the misguided youth who thought it was a good idea to rush out into the wasteland and bucking raiders until they blacked out, only to find a way that it was better off shooting them from the get-go. He thought that he hit the lowest of the lows when he took refuge in a dumpster. In recent days, he reconsidered that, and determined his new standard of pathetic. Was he who he was now? Lying underneath a dead tree, playing around with goggles, completely strayed from his goals. However, he took the bad along with the good. As tiny good as it might have been, he had more bullets on him now than he did when he left the cellar of his friends. He may have strayed from his goals, but he had yet to stray from his morals. Yet, killing another pony, even a raider, was beyond him. Letting others do so, however, was just fine. So was stealing, as long as the pony was a ravening lunatic murderer. Clearly, Falcon Wing had the caliber of a true admirable hero. He hadn't experienced anything like he had on the Sunset since then. He did feel angry sometimes without a proper excuse, finding himself with anger at the world itself in all of its fucked-up glory, but nothing akin to that incident. He was unsure if it was because he was doing a good job not losing himself, or because he feared himself in that state of mind, of what he could do and what could happen to him. In addition to his moral dilemma, which he still hadn't sorted out, he understood it just fine, just lacked the conviction to carry it out. So, the fact of the matter was that he was a wayward soul with the desire to do good, but lacked the fortitude to make difficult choices. How very weak. It made him wonder just how he was still alive in such an unforgiving place, when he was not willing to kill for his own life. Or perhaps he was. It was all dreadfully confusing. The goggles were back on his head, resting on his forehead. The empty can from his daily meal was tossed a few feet away. His decision had been made. He was going to return to the cellar. His only accomplishment in 8 days? Assisting the liberation of the ponies in Klaxon and Steiner's old town. For whatever reason, that did not seem as bad as Falconwing thought it was. The long walk back to Ponyville did not offer any new sights. It just made it clear just how desensitized he had become to the ruins of Equestria. He passed skeletons lying on the discolored grass, said a word or two out of respect, and kept walking. If he stopped to bury all the remains he found, it would take months for him to get back to the basement. Just as he was getting too jaded, the world was utterly shaken. The Ponyville ruins were belching smoke into the gray skies. The sound of DJ Palmthree's broadcast emanated from his saddlebags with clear, crystal clarity as he raced across the deadened land, listening to the progression of events everywhere in the wastes. Things were looking grim, but able to hear about it was yet another thing he had to thank Klaxon for when he found the stallion, dead or alive as the case may be. First, our hearts and prayers go out to the folks of Friendship City and every pony who had relatives there. Late yesterday, in the most horrific attack yet, that airborne plague calling themselves the Enclave brutally slaughtered Friendship City. The city's gone, children. Hundreds of ponies dead. If you didn't believe me before, believe me now. The Enclave ain't here to save no pony. They ain't our friends. The radio echoed eerily in the rubble-filled streets. The remains of... what remains of Ponyville to begin with. They were all gone. Raiders were nothing but gore and blood strewn in the debris. From different kinds of armors he saw blood soaked and littered the streets. He knew that most, had spent their last moments warring with each other. In the end, it was all for naught. In the end, both sides were wiped out brutally and effectively. War, like stairs, never changes. Many innocent ponies elsewhere died in similar displays of extermination. If DJ Palmthree's reports would be believed, and Falcon believed them after seeing what happened to Ponyville with his own eyes. He traversed the leveled buildings, finding purchase on large slabs of concrete and wooden struts, and vaulting himself up and over the rubble. Elena was right. Even without wings, he had the agility and speed of a proper Pegasus, honed in the wasteland in ways he never dreamed of when he was an introvert above the clouds. He would himself through the puddles of flesh, ignoring the smell of blood and the after effects of gunfire. The air was electrified with magical energy weapon discharges. Weapons were able to turn a pony into ash with one hit, but simply tear through their bodies in a way bolts could not. Even the pea shooter, with its affinity for precision and massive damage, could not contend. duck under that falling lamppost, jump over that barrier of mangled wall, gallop through the flames, feel the heat and emerge on the other side like a phoenix reborn. He was no longer concerned about being a hero. His mind was focused solely on his friends. DJ Ponthree's voice followed him, as did his overcoat, sweeping the rushing air underneath it, and billowing out as he ran, as if he wished to compensate for his own clipped wings. This broadcast, it's not exactly live, and I have a message for the black armored soldiers who just burst into the station of the shattered Herfridge Tower. That thing you're looking at with a glowy blue light? A little homebrew surprise rigged to the spark battery from a weapon made by the motherfucking stars. Farewell, you... The deep voice of the stallion gave way to static. Falcon Wing did not stop running, even to shut off the crackling that echoed off his nigh-deserted town. Of course, his course took him right down that street, the street he landed in amidst the dead of night, the street where he lost part of himself. He raced down it, over and all the obstacles in his way, a much stronger pony than he was then. He did not even give the ordeal a passing thought as he went. Find Klaxon, find Steiner, then find out what the fuck happened in Hope. Falcon thought, a mantra that repeated itself in his head. Son of a bitch, the redcoat shouted, seeing what had become of the building that stood close to the train tracks. It finally happened. 200 years and it was the Enclave to knock it down. He threw himself the rest of the way to the building, landing in a collapsed building and digging into the wood so charred and smashed. He bared his teeth as he tossed bits of wood aside, ignoring splinters that dug into them. They're alive, he told himself, practically glowing as he tore through the pile. Pieces of wood landed with a faint thump behind him after soaring through the air in an arc. They lasted this fucking long. I don't see how some shitty Pekasai could do either once to kill them. His hooves were not good enough now. He bit with a few large planks of wood and hauled them out, causing a small cascade of rubble to spread out. Repeating the process and suffering several splinters in his gums, he saw what he was looking for, the dumpster. It was crushed in the collapse, caving it onto itself, and wedged into the cellar entrance. Falcon Wing's heart sank. Yet the two stallions were down there. They were trapped. He jumped off of the pile of debris, gut-wrenching grief hitting him, and hitting him hard. He trembled, staggering for a little, then finally threw up. Hell of a time for that happen. Nasty, boy. Did you swallow some of that shit you bit into? Said a familiar earth pony. Falcon Wing, who was still heaving at the same time, perked up instantly. He looked around and saw them, the two stallions standing behind him, raising their brows. How long? Long enough to see that whole display, Steiner answered him. We were out scavenging when we heard your radio. Speaking of which, do you fancy that sound of that static accompanying your meals? You were scavenging? In all of this? Falcon continued, ignoring the comment about the radio and planning to gaze over the leveled and burning buildings. You'd be surprised what we found. We came across a raider with stashes without any raiders to guard them. Looked like this place is ours. I see, Falcon said, slowly regaining his composure. From the looks of things, the two had overcome their emotional hurdle the last few days. What better way to celebrate than revel in the destruction of the wasteland competition? Ponyville was theirs. Whatever was still standing, at least. It's good to see you guys too, by the way, he added, smiling weakly, his mouth stained red, bits of wood sticking out. Steiner narrowed his eyes, sighed, and shook his head. He'd have to fix that. This is what we get for letting you rush out to play hero, Klaxon deadpanned. How'd you two get out of here anyway? Dumpster's bust, the redcoat asked, gesturing back to the pile beneath him. Emergency tunnel, the dark blue unicorn stated. Called it, Falcon mused, looking into his bag to turn off the static. History's being made.
How does one get their name remembered? The emergency tunnel was a series of tunnels with various exits around Ponyville. Steiner's Enchanted created perfect circular tunnels underneath the town large enough for the two stallions to walk side by side through. The entrances to them were usually in nondescript buildings. Many of those buildings had been blocked off from the said ruins come down themselves. Unfortunately, redundancy in the design ensured that even the options were limited. There were still options nonetheless. One such option was, again, found underneath a dumpster. It was only 2 blocks away from the collapsed building, and Steiner revealed the burrow entrance with his telekinesis. "So, dumpsters, are they running theme with you guys, or what?" Falcon inquired. "They are big and no one looks under them. That makes them useful," Steiner replied. "Yeah, no one looks under them, they just crawl inside. And not even making a joke about you, Falcon. I was looking for caps one day, when all of a sudden this crazy fuck throws theirself onto me," Claxon started saying. Falcon interjected with, "Why would you look for caps in a dumpster?" He was flabbergasted. "You can find a lot of things in the dumpsters. Falcon, caps, parts, an enemy or a friend," Steiner said. "But enough of this. There are things to be done." He beckoned the two into the tunnel, entering himself, and placed the dumpster exactly as it was before. With the radar hold on Ponyville broken, it seemed unnecessary, but old habits die hard. Falcon Wing gulped down a healing potion, and moments after he emptied the bottle, he felt his gums soothe and the bleeding gashes mend. Lesson learned: don't bite on wood. Steiner removed the splinters with his magic Barharhuth to ensure the problem-free recovery. The cellar was the same as how Falcon Wing remembered it when he left. Even with tons of broken wood just overhead, the cellar showed no signs of being rushed for wear, a testament to pre-war engineering. He was glad the skeletons were long removed from the building, or else their burial would have been much less ceremonious. Once he was back to snuff, Falcon was quick to get back to business. For one, finding out just what the hell his goggles were for. Information he wished he knew had before. When over his eyes, the goggles gave him a magical HUD interface, that's HUD, able to display friendlies and hostiles in his vicinity. An eyes-forward sparkle, right now, as he were then, Steiner and Klaxon were denoted with a yellow notch in a directional line. Apparently, facing away from the welcoming mat meant he was roughly facing west. Interesting. It also gave him access to an inventory sorting spell. It gave him an entire manifest of his saddlebags right before him, his eyes, and by using it, he would be able to retrieve what he needed without actively rummaging through his stuff. Insanely useful that was. "Steiner's hoofwork, those are," Klaxon said, as the Falcon played around with the features he was told about, and accessed others he had not been informed of. Spellbound. "Apparently, he found some old Sabletech stuff and made a pip-buck for your head. If you mind a working terminal out there, you can jack in and look at its contents directly." "So, Steiner was the one who put this note in here," Falcon said, using the inventory spell to retrieve the paper, and was the easiest of ease. Steiner nodded. "Jacking in also recharges the lights," he said. Lights? In a dead of night, they were not stealthy at the best. But it meant Falcon Wing didn't have to bumble around in the dark. A pip-buck for one's head. Most useful indeed. Second order of business, resupplying. That was pretty straightforward, and the other two stallions pulling in a wasteland treasure trove, their inventory was hardly affected by it. Third order of business, filling them in on what happened in Hope. "You saved them?" Steiner asked when Falcon was done speaking. "Broke their wagon, anyway. What's the deal with Elena and you two?" Falcon replied. "Not two. Him," Klaxon replied with a snort. "She was infatuated with him as a filly." "I hope my absence has not allowed her to grow out of it. It hasn't. Healthy," Steiner nickered. Falcon arched a brow and said, Was this before or... Never mind. He didn't need to sour the reunion by bringing up what as well might be ancient history. Not when things were as grim as they were. We need to head over there. From what DJ Palm 3 said, the Enclave is killing off ponies in cities too, not just raiders. Fourth order of business. Klaxon, thanks for all the shit you put in my bags. Just, thanks a lot. I did not think we would ever approach these walls again, Steiner deadpanned as the trio walked in front of the Gate of Hope. These hardly go the way you planned it, Klaxon said, in response. Falcon was quiet, save for the clicking of his goggles every time he tapped a hoof down the side, switching through different menus. Walking on only 3 legs, he was lagging behind the others a small distance. I don't see fires. I don't smell any smoke. You think the Enclave overlooked the compound? Klaxon asked, his dark blue companion. How does one overlook a giant wall in the middle of a city from the sky? Steiner replied. They don't, so what gives? They stopped and looked back at Falconwing. What do you make of all this, being ex-Pegasus and all? The bronze stallion asked. Falconwing tapped the side of his goggles one last time, clearing his HUD, save for the EFS. I don't want to think about the Enclave anymore. It scares me, though, to think my parents were part of it, and that the rumors about how they died might actually be true. There's nothing that I can say or do or justify wiping out hundreds of ponies like that. I can only hope some of them disobeyed their orders. And when the Enclave, those ones who did are probably dead. The stallions gave him strange looks, as if they hadn't expected such an answer. What? The Red Colt asked. You wanted my advice on this? Here it is. Right then, Steiner said, about to walk up to the gate, when Falcon called out, Why isn't Camelot on my map? What? Both ponies said at nearly the same time. Camelot, it's not on the map. Falcon looked past the ruins husk of hope, over the ancient mountains where the city was said to sit upon. Visible from Ponyville, Klaxon and Steiner followed his gaze. There was no city to be seen, just the huge gash in the rock face where the power of Enclave weaponry was unleashed. The waterfall flowed unabated. Those fuckers destroyed Camelot, the stallions said at the same time, giving each other a strange look. That was a blend of confusion and disbelief. Confusion at their sudden synchronicity, and disbelief that they hadn't noticed the city's disappearance from the Equestrian landscape when they emerged from the underground after the Enclave moved on from Ponyville. They destroyed one of the last remnants of the past, of when Celestia and Luna... This isn't a wasteland genocide! Falconwing blurted out, slowly piecing things together. The stallions turned their odd looks toward him. Well, it is, but not in the usual sense. The Enclaves are laying down the foundations of a Pegasus-ruled wasteland. They're killing and destroying everything and anything they don't see fit to exist in their Equestria. And they left Hope all alone, 'cause it's just a dang little town, isn't it? Klaxon snorted, stomping his hoof. They had no damn right to do this. Falcon noted this was the first actual reaction he had gotten from the two about the current events. Well, second if their celebratory scavenging was to be continued. So what do we do now? Steiner asked. Falcon stammered. Really, what could they do? This was the Grand Pegasus Enclave, the technological superiors to all of the wasteland. The Enclave who grew crops out of the very clouds themselves. The Enclave whose raptor airships were fabled dragon slayers. The Enclave who had flying fortresses in the form of thunderheads. The Enclave whose soldiers were trained to shock, awe, and terrify the enemy, and were armed with weapons that did just that. Steiner stomped his hoof down in front of Falconwing. What do we do? he said, with a steely determination in his ember-colored eyes. They were beginning to spill out an ominous crimson light. The dark blue unicorn scar started to glow white and make his hair whip around on his head. The red colt returned to his senses at that, no longer staring blankly at the mountains in the distance. He saw the anger in Steiner's eyes, and saw how it was overtaking him. The story of how he got his key mark came to Falcon's mind, and he understood. Steiner's great magical potential was tied directly to his emotions. Joy, sorrow, or anger all had an impact on powers. It's why he was the one to bring up those past events, and why he imposed solitude on himself in the days after. He needed to get the burden off him in order to safely use his magic. Why he always kept a neutral disposition. Why he refused to do anything beyond powering the lamp. "We keep our heads first and foremost," Falcon Wing replied sternly, meeting Steiner's eyes, and showing that he was completely serious about his words. He knew what it was like in his inner phoenix. "Then, we find out what we can do about what the Enclave is doing now. Then, we plan a counterattack. If the past is anything to go by, the Stable Dweller is already at the forefront of the resistance effort," Steiner said, his anger draining away from his expression, the scar no longer illuminating light. In his stead was a pony of calculating, tactical mind. Falcon smiled a small bit. The Steiner he knew was back. The sheet metal gate to Hope's compound creaked and split down the middle, each half pulling in opposite directions. Inside, Wastelanders awaited their new arrivals. Turning to look in the compound, Falcon Wing saw Elena, standing next to the front of the crowd. She mouthed, "Mr. Hero."
What is a Pegasus without their wings? The next few days were spent devising a way to mop up Enclave forces across the wasteland. DJ Ponthy's broadcasts during this time were infuriatingly strained, the pony only being able to speak for minutes at a time before being tracked down and overridden, or in recent cases, before blowing the transmission station to Kingdom Come along with any baddies, meaning the Equestrian wasteland was without a voice nearly omnipresent knowledge about the happenings going on. That meant a substitution was in order, but not something that would send messages. Klaxon was a pony that can repair and maintain. Steiner was a pony who invented. Together, they completely reworked the radio into something that it was never meant to be. A long-range receiver and tracker, one that hooked up directly into the pipe-eye. That's what we're calling it now, by the way. The compound had no shortage of scrap parts to lend the cause. The result was a rusty box full of wiring, tubing, and circuitry. Flickering, oblong shapes, lights cracked softly. The only thing recognizable was the radio speakers gutted and repurposed. The makeshift antenna was fastened together using metal rods of various sizes and lengths, the largest one being the main structure for smaller prongs. It was mounted on the watchtower, leading into the mess of, but somehow functioning, technology was within the wire that could be extended from the pipe-eye to access terminals. Using the map interface, Falcon Wing was monitoring the source of various radio signals across the wasteland, all marked in his view. Twisting the dial scrolled across the map of the wasteland. All settlements from Manhattan to Junction R7 were accounted for, except for Counterlot. That was a blank spot. Klaxon fiddled with the assembly with the various tools he carried in his saddlebags for repairs on the go, while Steiner focused on it in intense concentration. His scar was glowing as he channeled the magical field that made it all work. Falcon Wing was scouring his memory for all the things he knew about Enclave communication protocols. His extensive reading was paying off. Falcon Wing, eavesdropping with style, he had tapped into the Enclave's communication frequency. With the sources of various transmissions revealed in his map, the bulk of Pegasi forces were pressing into the ever-free forest, or, rather, was over it. Numerous raptors and thunderheads,
all going after some goal on the wingless Pegasus had no clue about. Radio chatter spoke up of some pony named Red-Eye. Other divisions were situated in the major wasteland cities such as Manhattan and Philadelphia. For what Falcon could make out of the few images, there were already battles breaking out across and between the Enclave and the warriors of the wastes. It occurred to him that those laying their lives on the line weren't doing it to be called heroes. They did not want the wasteland to know them by some moniker, or to have their deeds enthrall the listeners of the radio. They were risking life and limb, not for glory, but for their homes and for all they cared about. For the good of every pony still alive, it was kill or be killed, and the Enclave showed no reservations as a whole concerning the slaughter of innocents. So the wasteland struck back, not because it was a heroic thing to do, but because it was the right thing to do, the decent thing to do, and sometimes the right to do isn't the preferred option. Falconwing knew that, and accepted it. It did in no way justify mindless acts of violence, as he was once tempted to commit by his rage, but that did not mean it was okay to be angry. Fire without guidance was a short-lived explosion. Fire given form and purpose was a fatal phoenix. And so, he would live his life as a phoenix, rising to whatever challenge he should come across, a fiery spirit, and a champion for good. Unseen to all because of his overcoat, and unnoticed by him, Falconwing's cheating market appeared. A silver shield with burning golden wings extended from either side.
Whoa! Oh man! Not gonna lie, the second part of that first story is so much more action intense, and garbage cans. I'm having a fangirling moment right here. There are no fan men. I'm just preparing for the next. Oh yeah. Oh man. I'm just looking through this and we have only just begun. That's story 1 of 3. Can't wait to see our main character, our badass, kick some Enclave ass. You guys ready? I'm ready. See you soon, guys. Audio Potato out.